Guitarist and collaborator Pat Metheny said, Ornette Coleman has created his own world, his own reality, his own language, to the point that emulation is too daunting for most musicians to even consider. The way he has relentlessly assumed responsibility for his own singular musical aesthetic may be one of the most important beacons of artistic vision and clarity of our time. Here was a man who made his own music his own way with nearly unparalleled artistic success. Saxophonist Jackie McLean echoes Pat Metheny's comments.
A lot of people in the mid-50s were already playing music that had an open concept, what I call the big room. A place where you could cross a threshold and have no barriers, no key signatures, no chord progressions, no particular form, And later on, Ornette came to New York with his quartet and stood his ground and made this music really sink in and work, and that's the thing that I admire about Ornette, not only his writing and playing, but the fact that he stood his ground and stood by his music and took the slings and arrows of all the criticism that came towards him, because a lot of musicians from the bebop school thought that they were just playing any old thing.
Free Jazz was the title of a 1960 album by Ornette Coleman, who could be considered the spiritual figurehead of a musical evolution that expanded the boundaries of traditional elements of music, such as melody, harmony, rhythm, and pitch. At the time that the movement really took hold in the late 1950s, it was also referred to as avant-garde or the new thing. In more recent years, it's been referred to as open improvisation or just improvised music. Ornette Coleman was born in 1930 and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, where he grew up hearing what was called the Texas tenor sax style, heavily influenced by blues and R&B and typified by players like King Curtis, Illinois Jacquet, and Arnett Cobb. It's a fascinating dichotomy that as much as Ornette reimagined and evolved his music beyond its traditional roots, they always remained in evidence. In his early years, the influence of other players, including Charlie Parker, was evident. But from the start, Ornette's musical vision seemed to come from within. Growing up, he said, I thought music was just something human beings did naturally, like eating. The saxophone was like a toy, and I just played it. I didn't know you had to learn something to find out what the toy does. He played in a high school band, but he was reportedly thrown out for improvising during a march. At the start of his career, Ornette was living in Los Angeles, working during the day as an elevator operator at a department store. I don't know if he dressed as flamboyantly in those days as he did later on, but I have this mental picture of the elevator door opening to reveal a resplendent Ornette at the controls. Ornette recorded his debut album as a leader in 1958. It was relatively traditional in its instrumentation and approach to tunes, but you can hear that Ornette is heading down new paths. After this record, Ornette preferred to work without a piano. His microtonal approach might have disinclined him to play with a fixed-pitch instrument, or perhaps it was as Sonny Rollins described, that the piano limited or directed harmonic directions. The ensemble sound of Ornette and Don Cherry is one of the more unique and recognizable in jazz. In addition to a shared musical vision, each played a unique instrument that contributed to the sound. Ornette played a white plastic Grafton saxophone, the same kind of horn that Bird played on the Massey Hall recording. Don Cherry played a pocket trumpet, which is a full-size B-flat trumpet with extra tubing bends and, in most cases, a smaller bell. A few years later, Ornette also started playing violin and trumpet, after a fashion. Ornette and Cherry worked for a short time in 1958 in a band led by Canadian pianist Paul Bley, along with Charlie Hayden on bass and Billy Higgins on drums, who would then become Ornette's working band. It's a pretty interesting historical connection that the leader of the modern jazz quartet, a tightly controlled chamber jazz ensemble, would play an important role in boosting Ornette's early career. Pianist John Lewis invited Ornette and Don Cherry to take part in the Lenox School of Jazz. He also booked the band at the Monterey Jazz Festival, and he helped Ornette land a record contract with Atlantic. Ornette's 1959 release for Atlantic, The Shape of Jazz to Come, was a watershed album for him and for jazz in general, one of the albums that made 1959 such a monumental year for jazz. The title was suggested by his producer to give a listener some indication that the music charted a new path. It introduced the tune Lonely Woman, which exemplifies Ornette's melody-driven approach to composition. After the release of the album, John Lewis helped Ornette book a gig for the quartet at the 5 Spot in New York. It was supposed to be a 2-week engagement, but it attracted so much attention that it wound up extended for several months, packing people in as much for the controversy as the music. Although it was not his intention to be polarizing, people had strong and sometimes angry differences of opinion on whether Ornette was a leading light or a charlatan, whether the music represented the future or a destruction of the past.
I went over to this club by MacArthur Park on Wilshire called The Hague, and Jerry Mulligan was playing there. They started their first set, and after they began to play, a guy came in and asked if he could sit in. He got up on the bandstand and proceeded to take out his horn, and the horn was white. It was plastic, you know. I'd never seen a plastic horn before, you know. This guy started to play. It was like, you know, the heavens opened up for me, because I saw and I heard something that I'd been feeling, and all of a sudden, Jerry Mulligan asked him to stop.
To me, they were playing as if the music was written. You know, when they was improvised, it was sound like, oh, they've already learned that, you know. So I said, oh, I don't want to play like that. I want to play directly from something that inspired me. And they said, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm improvising. So you ain't playing shit. You can't play like that. I said, play like what? The way you're playing.
I said, I heard you play the other night, man. You sounded so brilliant. He said, thank you. He said, not many people tell me that. And I said, man, I just wish that we could play music together sometime. And he said, well, what about now? And so we went to his apartment. That's how I met him, and we played and played and played, and we might have stayed in there for 3 or 4 days, I don't know. So that's when the quartet started. The first night I played at the 5 Spot, I was uncovering my bass. Billy was putting up his drums, and Cherry was getting his horn, Ornette was getting his horn out, and I looked up at the bar, which was facing the stage, and standing along the bar was Wilbur Ware, Charlie Mingus, Paul Chambers, Percy Heath. Every great bass player in New York City was standing there staring me right in the face. And I said, from that moment on, I closed my eyes. I think we played there for 4 months, 6 nights a week. And every night the place was packed. One night I was playing with my eyes closed again, and I'm playing, and all of a sudden I open my eyes and somebody's up on the stage with his ear to the F-hole of my bass. And I looked over at Ornette and I said, Coleman, who is this, man? Get him off this bandstand. He says, that's Leonard Bernstein.
Ornette's 1960 record, called Free Jazz, with a Jackson Pollock painting on the cover, pushed musical boundaries even further. A continuous 36-minute improvisation is performed by 2 quartets playing simultaneously, one in each channel. As an example of the split in public opinion, Downbeat published a pair of reviews called Double View of a Double Quartet. One critic awarded it 5 stars, writing, "It restores to currency an element that has been absent in most jazz since the onset of the swing orchestra, spontaneous group improvisation." The other critic awarded it no stars, writing, "The only semblance of collectivity lies in the fact that these 8 nihilists were collected together with one common cause, to destroy the music that gave them birth." It's interesting to listen to the 2 channels independently and then together. I've done that for you in this clip. You'll hear the left side for about 45 seconds, and then the same section of music on the right side, and then the 2 together as they appear on the album. The dissonant and to some ears chaotic sound of free jazz was sometimes seen as a reflection of the social turbulence of the 1960s, when violent protests in pursuit of civil rights and in opposition to the Vietnam War combined with the fear of nuclear world war that reached its peak during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Children were advised to hide under their desks in the event of an atomic explosion, which is a surreal bit of innocence or ignorance.
We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. We must get ready for it. Duck and cover. Atta boy, Tony. Act fast.
Coleman spoke the paranoia that existed in the nuclear age. The reaction that many people had just to this idea that the entire world could be blown up.
Play music with this urgency, this desperate urgency to make something new that's never been before, as if you're on the front line and you're risking your life for every note you play.
Although the title of the album cemented the term free jazz in general and in connection with his music, Ornette, like Mingus, didn't like the fact that it seemed to imply a lack of compositional integrity or forethought.
And at that time, there wasn't a title, but I had always called my new music Harmolodic, but their companies called it free jazz because the person seemed as if he was getting up playing from the top of his head, but I have never done that. I've always been very, very thought out in what I was trying to do.
In that last clip, Ornette was sitting with his son, DiNardo. DiNardo made his recording debut at the age of 10 on Ornette's 1966 album, The Empty Foxhole. Ornette said DiNardo was not yet impeded by preconception or technique, although he had studied drums up until that point. Charlie Hayden, who played bass on that record, said DiNardo was going to startle every drummer that heard him. DiNardo continued to play with his father's bands and eventually became his manager. In the 1970s and into the 80s, Ornette embraced the influences of rock and funk on jazz with his electric band, Primetime. Pat Metheny said, "Primetime was one of the few successful efforts to transcend electrical wires and knobs to ascend to true soul music." This album featured a guest appearance by Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. In 1985, Ornette collaborated with Pat Metheny on an album titled Song X. Metheny wrote, "We agreed that we should try to do something that was unlike anything that might be expected of either of us, and that we should try to develop a language and a way of playing together that was particular to this project. We would get together every day for a month for as long as 10 hours at a stretch. It was an amazing opportunity to examine Ornette's thinking processes, as well as learning a lot about improvising from one of the genuine living masters. On the Song X tour, I was struck by just how much sheer time and energy Ornette puts into his music. We would check into a hotel at noon, and Ornette would go to his room and start practicing, right up to the sound check at 4 p.m. He would then play non-stop all through the sound check and then practice right up until the first note of the concert, play a 2.5-hour set, and then stay and play some more after the gig. I have never seen any musician of any age with that kind of dedication and just plain stamina." Ornette used the term Harmolodics to describe his musical approach. He defined it as the use of the physical and the mental of one's own logic made into an expression of sound to bring about the musical sensation of unison executed by a single person or with a group. Harmony, melody, speed, rhythm, time, and phrases all have equal position. Harmolodic was also the name of a record company co-founded by Ornette and Ornette Coleman in 1995.
We do lots of rehearsal because of the particular kind of music that we are playing, which is called Harmolodics. And lots of people ask me what Harmolodics is or how do you play it, and I was trying to explain to a person today that basically Harmolodic is a philosophy and a theory that makes sound into logic that has some meaning to human beings. Yeah. That's basically what it is.
In 1994, Ornette was commissioned by the Cologne Philharmonic. The piece, termed a harmolodic ballet, was called Architecture in Motion. The dancers were drawn from 7 traditions: Middle Eastern, Chinese, Indian, flamenco, ballet, breakdancing, and tap.
As I thought about the title for it, it made me realize more and more that the concept of form, in other words, things that are in certain shapes and motion, that architect is probably the only expression that stands complete on its own without you having to know anything about the architect. How many dancers have the opportunity to dance in a ballet without being called a folk dancer, or a tap dancer, or a belly dancer? These are titles that doesn't necessarily describe what a person does. It only tells you what territory you should be in.
It's been great to go back to kind of square one and be able to do total improv to this incredible music. You know, I found it not just challenging, but something almost a rebirth and something that has been quite inspiring.
With joining with everyone else, I found it to help me to enhance myself and my form, and to respect my own form as well as everybody else's, to grasp a better understanding of the dance and music.
Revolutions in art and music. We feel like if we can dance to this, we can dance to anything. It was a great challenge.
In 2006, at the age of 76, Ornette released a live recording on a new record label, both of which were called Sound Grammar. The next year, he was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in Music and a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. Here's Ornette sharing some of his thoughts on music around that time.
So for me, making music is like a form of religion for me, because it soothes the heart and increases the pleasure of the brain. And most of all, it's very enjoyable to to express something that you can only hear and can't see, which is not bad. And the music that I do, I write out all the music, but I write everyone a different part, so they can make a contribution to the whole. For me, I mean, I don't call it composing. I think I've been calling it sound grammar, and for a better technical part, I call it harmolodics. I guess you could say sound is to people what the sun is to light, something like that, you know. Which I don't want to sound like I'm being very intellectual, because I'm not, you know. But from the fact that I have been in this business for a long time, and this is a moment of many moments that I've had, and I'm always trying to make sure that they become beneficial by not taking up all your time to say something that doesn't mean anything, or to say something that someone is going to hear it that might be more interested in doing something they haven't thought about. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that human is more important than technology.
You often hear people refer to the vocal quality of Ornette's playing. Lou Reed said, "When you talk about someone speaking through their instrument, that's Ornette. He changed everything." Shelley Mann said he sounds like a person laughing and a person crying. As for Ornette, he said, "I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody. I just want to be as human as I can get." Finally, a few more words from Pat Metheny, who speaks with such affection and respect for Ornette Coleman. He has inspired thousands of musicians to look into our own hearts and minds to see what we may have to offer if we can only muster up the courage to listen to the songs inside of us the way Ornette has.